On April 15, 1920, in South Braintree, Massachusetts, two payroll guards were shot and killed in broad daylight during a brazen robbery. The assailants fled with over $15,000, leaving behind 6 spent bullet casings and 2 dying men on the pavement. Out of this brutal double homicide emerged one of the most polarizing legal battles in American history. At the center of the controversy was a novel and largely untested forensic discipline, criminal ballistics, the scientific analysis of firearms, bullets, and weapon marks. 3 weeks after the Braintree robbery, local authorities arrested 2 Italian immigrants, Nicola Sacco, a shoe factory worker, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, a fish peddler. Both men carried concealed handguns at the time of their arrest. Sacco possessed a .32 caliber Colt automatic pistol, while Vanzetti carried a .38 caliber Harrington and Richardson revolver. Police immediately sought to link these specific weapons to the fatal projectiles recovered from the bodies of the victims during the post-mortem examinations. In the early 1920s, police procedures lacked modern standards regarding the chain of custody, defined as the documented, unbroken paper trail tracking the seizure, custody, and transfer of physical evidence. Investigators handled the physical artifacts with alarming informality. Bullets were scratched with hand-carved marks for identification, passed between various examiners without official logs, and stored in unsealed paper envelopes. This compromised handling would later cast deep doubt on whether the physical evidence presented in court was actually the unadulterated evidence recovered from the crime scene. The prosecution engaged several local gun experts to fire Sacco's Colt pistol and compare the test bullets against bullet number 3, the single fatal round that had killed guard Frederick Parmenter. In this era, forensically evaluating bullet markings was an immature practice. Early ballistics examiners relied primarily on low-power magnifying glasses and crude calipers to measure barrel grooves. The comparative methodology was highly subjective, lacking standardized statistical baselines, formal photographic documentation, or peer-reviewed testing protocols. When the trial commenced in Dedham, Massachusetts in 1921, the state presented testimony from Captain William Proctor, head of the Massachusetts State Police. Proctor testified under oath that bullet number 3 possessed markings consistent with having been fired through Sacco's pistol. To the lay jury, this statement sounded like definitive scientific proof connecting the suspect directly to the fatal shot. However, the exact phrasing disguised a crucial ambiguity that would only come to light years after the verdict was rendered. Under cross-examination, defense attorneys pressed the prosecution experts to establish absolute technical certainty. The defense brought forward its own expert witnesses, including James Burns and Charles Van Amberg, who testified that the striations on the fatal bullet did not align with test rounds fired from Sacco's weapon. In an era before codified legal standards for forensic reliability, the courtroom devolved into a confusing clash of competing opinions, leaving jurors to evaluate complex mechanical physics without guidance. Crucially, the defense struggled to articulate the full potential for exculpatory evidence, which refers to any material or statements favorable to the defendant that tend to clear them of guilt. Because forensic ballistics was still an emerging field, defense counsel could not point to established national standards to systematically dismantle the state's forensic claims. The technical debate was further obscured by the intense political prejudice surrounding the defendants' avowed anarchist political beliefs. In July 1921, the jury returned guilty verdicts for both Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, sentencing them to death by electrocution. The ballistics testimony had played a decisive role in convincing the jury that Sacco's firearm was indeed the murder weapon. Yet, shortly after the trial concluded, Captain Proctor signed a sworn affidavit revealing a chilling manipulation behind his trial testimony regarding the fatal bullet. Proctor admitted in his affidavit that he had repeatedly told the prosecutor before the trial that he did not believe bullet number 3 had come from Sacco's gun. To bypass this objection, the prosecutor and Proctor crafted a carefully structured question for the courtroom testimony. When asked if the bullet came from the Colt, Proctor replied that it was consistent with having passed through such a barrel, deliberately concealing his expert opinion that it came from an entirely different firearm. While Sacco and Vanzetti sat on death row appealing their sentences, the field of firearms identification underwent a radical technological transformation. In the mid-1920s, pioneer Calvin Goddard and his colleagues developed the optical comparison microscope. This breakthrough instrument allowed analysts to view two bullets side by side under identical magnification through a single eyepiece, aligning microscopic lands and grooves with unprecedented visual precision and objective verification. In 1927, as international protests erupted and Governor Alvin T. Fuller established a special advisory committee to review the case, Goddard was invited to examine the original physical evidence using his new comparison microscope. Goddard examined the 4 bullets recovered from the victims alongside Sacco's Colt pistol and newly test-fired rounds. His physical examination directly challenged the assertions made by earlier defense experts during the initial trial. Goddard concluded that bullet number 3 matched the test rounds fired from Sacco's pistol down to minute, microscopic scratch marks left by unique imperfections in the gun's barrel. He also asserted that a spent shell casing found at the crime scene matched Sacco's weapon. Based largely on Goddard's seemingly definitive technical demonstration, the governor's committee upheld the original convictions, clearing the legal path for the executions. Despite Goddard's findings, severe questions regarding forensic reliability persisted among legal scholars and independent investigators. Skeptics emphasized that the physical evidence had passed through dozens of hands over 7 years without strict chain of custody protections. Critics alleged that bullet number 3 and its matching casing might have been substituted by overzealous investigators early in the investigation, or that the original evidence had been altered during crude prior physical testing. In 1961, forensic scientists Frank Jury and Jack Weller conducted a modern re-examination of the preserved physical evidence using state-of-the-art laboratory equipment. Their photographic and microscopic tests reconfirmed that bullet number 3 was fired from Sacco's Colt pistol. However, modern analytical techniques could not resolve the fundamental historical doubt regarding whether that specific projectile had been planted or swapped prior to the 1921 court proceedings. The legal battle surrounding the Sacco and Vanzetti trial served as a historic catalyst for sweeping reforms in judicial procedure and criminal evidence handling. Courts increasingly recognized that presenting unvalidated scientific claims to a jury without objective standards created an unacceptable risk of miscarriages of justice. The case highlighted the imperative need for rigorous chain of custody protocols and mandatory pre-trial disclosure of exculpatory evidence. Today, modern forensic ballistics relies on automated computer algorithms, standardized database matching systems, and rigorous peer review to eliminate subjective examiner bias. The systemic evidentiary vulnerabilities exposed during the 1920s Massachusetts trial helped force the legal system toward establishing strict scientific thresholds for expert witness testimony. Physical evidence in court was no longer accepted on authority alone, but required verifiable, reproducible proof. Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti were executed in August 1927, proclaiming their innocence until their final moments. Their trial remains an enduring case study in how early, unstandardized forensic techniques can intersect with social bias to produce a flawed legal outcome. Ultimately, the controversial ballistics evidence did not merely define a single historical verdict. It permanently transformed how physical evidence is secured, analyzed, and adjudicated in the modern justice system.